So we're in a new place now. Steven's moving out, but we're going to keep working on code spells together, and I think he's going to come over here to shoot these videos with me in the future, so this is the new place. But today, since I didn't get a ton of new questions from backers, I wanted to take kind of a biographical approach to Steven today. So I'm going to ask Steven a bunch of questions about his experiences in coding and like what got him into coding in the first place. So question number 1, when did you first learn how to code?
I guess you never finished learning how to code, so I'll answer when I first started to first learned a thing about coding. I guess this is in the early 90s. My family was living in Saudi Arabia, and my mom was just, a housewife, and she was kind of stuck at home all day, because in those days, like, women, you can't even go outside and drive.
Yeah, especially in Saudi Arabia.
In Saudi Arabia. I think they've recently changed it, but at the time she literally couldn't go outside without covering up her face and hair and stuff like that. So she stayed home a lot, and she would teach me just things after school, after kindergarten, because she was bored, and so was I guess. And one of those things was coding. So we had a computer, old Apple 2GS, I think, that ran BASIC, and she bought this book on basic programming, and we just worked through that book. So I'm very grateful. How thick
was the book?
Oh gosh, I don't remember. I was much smaller at the time. So
so probably
I remember it being a very big book, but it may well have been a small book. I hacked around on my own computers all the way up through high school, and then I had one just kind of bad coding teacher in high school. Right. I didn't like it, and he taught me a language that I didn't get, I guess. In retrospect, it's because he taught it poorly, but I didn't understand it, and sort of made me think, maybe all this coding I've been doing is just like baby coding, but the real coding that people really do out there in industry just isn't something that I would like. I just had that warped perception, like my senior year of high school, and I'm like, forget coding. It's a thing I liked doing, but I never thought I would do it as a career, so I'm just like, whatever, I'll give it up, I'll do something else.
So then, clearly you got your degree in coding, so, how did you come to that?
Yeah, I guess I was lucky that when I went to college, I majored in philosophy, and because it was a liberal arts college, they make you take at least some math, even if you're a philosophy major, and but I just really didn't want to do math, so I decided that I would take a coding class, because you could sort of cross-list it as a math course.
So you were cheating. You were cheating to get your math
credits. And it's like I've been coding my whole life. It's probably going to be an easy A.
Yeah.
And it was an easy A. But the teacher that I had was fantastic and was like, hey, you did really well. You should take this next course that I'm offering. And so I did, and that sequence continued. They kept convincing me to take one more course until finally I had taken enough courses to major in computer science as well as philosophy. So
clearly you went to graduate school, got your PhD. Maybe you could describe a little bit about what your PhD work at UCSD was.
Well, a lot of it was related to code spells. I went in to do my PhD work without having a very clear direction, but I knew I wanted to do something related to how people write code. What's the interface for coders? How can you make their lives easier? So I spent some time working on the Eclipse IDE and writing some plugins for that, and wrote kind of a cool plugin and a nice paper where this plugin would basically watch you coding, and when it noticed that you were refactoring your code, it would in the background try to do that refactoring for you, and then it would sort of suggest are you kind of like the paperclip in old Microsoft Word, right? It'd be like, are you refactoring that chunk of code into a function? Is this how you want it to look? And then you could click yes, and it would finish it for you.
So you wrote an Eclipse Clippy.
Kind of like an Eclipse Clippy. It was much less annoying than Clippy. It was just sort of it was much more like autocomplete. If you're actually in Google Docs nowadays, you start writing something and it's is this what you want? And if it's not you have to be no, go away. You just keep typing whatever you do want. So it was that kind of autocomplete sort of style, not the modal Clippy style. At some point in there, I decided I wanted to start working on interfaces for novice developers, like beginner coders, just because, I had a sort of textured experience, good experiences, my mom teaching me coding, but then bad experiences in high school, and then good ones in college, and I sort of realized just how important it is to sort of have the right experience when you're young and learning how to code. So started trying to think of what are interfaces that would help novices learn to code, and that's sort of where CodeSpells was born, because that's when I sort of remembered, I used to play Gnomic a little bit back in college, but there's this game, and I mentioned it on my blog, but there's this game called Gnomic. It's like a party game. It's not even a video game. It's just you take turns making rules. So the game comes with a very minimal set of rules, but they're all about how you add new rules. And then every time you play, you add different rules, and the game becomes something crazy and different every time. If you're playing with very creative people, it can be a lot of fun. And so I've used it to create and then play card games and other party games and dancing games, all sorts of crazy stuff. Or what's fun for kids tends to be games, and if only we could learn in a sort of gamified setting, wouldn't learning be fun? And so the idea of making a game where you're also reprogramming that game from inside of it, that sort of gave birth to CodeSpells. The only missing piece was like, well, why are you recoding the game inside of it? And the natural thing was, well, you're a wizard,
Yeah.
So like, if you're changing the rules of the very world around you, then, that sounds like the definition of magic. So why not make it a game about magic? And then the way that you write your spells is in code, and then, the rest is history. But that's what I was doing my PhD work on the time. We built a prototype of that, and then tested it out with novice programmers just to see if they were like suitably inspired by the idea of being a wizard. And as you might expect, they were. They kids like being wizards. I don't know.
Do you have any role models in programming, or in computer science, or in technology in general?
I do. I guess maybe one of the biggest ones is Paul Graham. Paul Graham wrote a series of, at least to me, influential essays, the early 2000s, that he compiled into a book called Hackers and Painters, and I read that in college, and it kind of shaped how I think about coding. He also is a founder of a successful startup, and is now the founder of a startup incubator called Y Combinator, and which like starts startups. So he started a meta startup, and he's a Lisp programmer. So he's written a lot of essays about Lisp. So I credit the fact that I use Lisp as my primary language, along with my worldview about startups, and sort of the value that coding can bring to the world through startups, all to Paul Graham and his writings.
Besides Hackers and Painters, do you have any books or literature that you would recommend to anyone who's either interested in pursuing programming for the first time, or someone who's already a programmer who's just trying to learn more about it or hone the craft or anything like that?
Well, my favorite book about computer science in general is called Gödel, Escher, Bach, which is by Douglas Hofstadter, and I'd recommend that to anyone who's a coder or just anyone.
Anyone.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. It is very much about computer science, but it's also about art and mathematics and
Covers
music.
A lot of topics.
Yeah, it kind of weaves them all together in a really interesting way. But Kurt Gödel was a mathematician who proved some interesting things about completeness and incompleteness of mathematical systems, and that then became kind of a framework for some of our fundamental results in computer science, like the halting problem. You can't write a generalized algorithm that can detect if some other algorithm in general is going to stop. You just cannot do it. There's a proof of that, and so anyway, there's a intellectual tradition that starts with mathematics and moves to computer science, and it's kind of the bedrock of everything we do as coders. It doesn't come up in your day-to-day life when you're writing Node.js apps, but I just feel like it's an important part of our culture, our history. It's forgotten by many. unfortunately. But I think it's worth reading. It's just a good read. It's fun too. It's not just like I'm not saying I think you should read it. Yeah, I think it's like just genuinely really interesting. It won the Pulitzer Prize.
So it must be good.
Yeah, it must be good. so Gödel Escherbach. But if just for honing your craft, Pragmatic Programmer I read in college, and that influenced me a lot. Any book about design patterns, like a lot of times you don't learn design patterns in college, and you don't necessarily learn them in industry. That you kind of do, because a lot of times senior developers know these things and they communicate them to you somehow. But just sitting down and reading through a book of design patterns, I think, opens your eyes to the different ways you can structure modular software.
Do you have a favorite movie that involves hacking or coding or anything like that you recommend?
Well, I like hackers, but not because it's at all realistic. It's just kind of funny and cheesy and campy, and it's from the days when I was much younger. But The Imitation Game, I think, is really cool. It's about Alan Turing and his code-breaking efforts during World War II. You've seen it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberpants. Crumbly Pants. I can never say his name.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephen. It's good to make sure everybody knows a little bit about your background.
Thanks,
and cool.
Yeah, we should interview Lindsay sometime.
Maybe.
Sorry, can we start over? I just realized my mustache is here.
Fix my bangs. Californians. Is your mustache okay? Is it just not behaving today? I'm having a grumpy day.
Okay, fine. Do it live.
Yeah.